Hi students, it's Mrs. T again, and in this video we're going to look further into the concept of migration, and this time we're going to talk about migration from one internal place to the next, but also from one country to the next in an unwilling manner, that is forced migration, because in the first video we looked at some push and pull factors. We haven't finished with that. We're going to look deeper into that, especially when we look at levels of development and styles of life. But many people who migrate from one place to the next are forced to do so because of a variety of reasons. We mentioned refugees in the previous chapter. There's forced migration that is caused by wars, by famine, by natural disasters. You can look up the country Montserrat. Let's see, I think I spelled it for you here. Yes, Montserrat is a tiny island nation in the Caribbean that essentially was evacuated in the early 2000s because the volcano became active again. And so there was some forced migration I think it's uninhabited now. There might be just a few hundred people who are left on the island in the only safe places for humans to be. You might be forced to do internal migration because of hurricanes or other, earthquakes or tsunamis, other kinds of natural disasters, such as some of you remember in your lifetime the stories of Hurricane Katrina refugees, a bad hurricane in 2005. It's been a long time ago now, but you probably remember it in your youth, when the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina meant people had to disperse from the New Orleans area, the Gulf Coast of Mississippi, to other parts of the nation. They were unhappy about it. They lost everything. That was a sort of forced push factor to get them to move away from that region. However, that's not the only type of push factor or pull factor is for those environmental reasons or economic reasons. Sometimes people are forced to move because of a variety of reasons, such as, historically, the image that you see on the board behind me is from chapter 3. It's on the African slave trade, the African diaspora. It is a key term that refers to spreading of people, usually unwillingly, from one location to the next. You can also talk about the Jewish diaspora. Typically, we do not use the word diaspora when we are talking about Indian removal and forced migration on the Trail of Tears of Native American removal, that is. But in this map of this section of map, it's almost a world map, but you have Australia left off of it, Antarctica, for instance. So you see a portion of North America here, but predominantly in the area of Africa. We're talking about the African slave trade here. Slaves were traded from many other locations, especially in South Asia, but this looks at slavery that we know of in our nation's history, the African slave trade. And so these arrows represent in the millions of people who were forced to migrate because they were captured and sold into the slave trade system. So you can see here that the majority of people landed in Brazil in South America, and another significant portion landed in the Caribbean area, Jamaica, Cuba, in this realm. And then, of course, we know that quite a few million arrived in North America to be bought and sold and traded based on their chattel status. Chattel means stuff that you own. This is called a chattel slavery system. Please notice also that slaves were captured and sold into Europe, into Asia, into Arabia, from Central Africa to Northern Africa. So the African slave trade certainly affected United States history significantly. However, look at all the other places on the planet where slaves from Africa were forced to go. So that certainly changes the cultural landscape of the destination location. Often the destination is not just one particular place, especially if you are considered to be chattel, which is just property that is owned. A lot of times property is sold or moved with, the household to someplace else. And so you see a special type of steppe migration that is completely unwilling in this particular case, whether it is Native American removal, the Jewish diaspora, the African diaspora. These are forced migration patterns. And by the way, even though we don't necessarily use the term slave trade in the present tense, it has that historical connotation that it occurred at some point in history but is over now. Please note that slaves are bought and sold daily, especially in these areas of Asia and the Arabian Peninsula, on a regular basis. I mentioned in a previous video that my husband was a contractor in Afghanistan, and he has quite a few examples of pictures that he took secretly of booths, for lack of a better word, in a flea market, for lack of a better word, in Jalalabad, which is it's historically very nasty kind of disputed area between Afghanistan and Pakistan, where slaves of all ages were being bought and sold. And today, we don't necessarily use the word slave. We use human trafficking as the modern day word for this kind of forced migration. Certainly human trafficking is something that also brings up in this nation. It brings up connotations of the sex trade, for instance. Of course, worldwide, that's part of it also, but the same old forced labor reasons that we know of historically in the slave trade in the United States, those are some of the same reasons why people are bought and sold into slavery all over the world still today. So slavery ain't over, unfortunately. So please keep that in mind when we're talking about forced migration. It's not merely something in the past. So I wanted to give you an example. Let me see if I can find it. Is it here? Nope, it's not there. Let me give you an example of, here we go, of a forced migration. It is, if you're watching this in February, it is Black History Month. And so this was one of the people who was highlighted. I get an email, a daily email with a lesser known person who can be highlighted in Black History Month. And this particular person, Josephine Margarita Bakhita, I believe is the way I pronounce her last name, was abducted. She was kidnapped from her home in Sudan, Darfur in Sudan in Africa, and she was sold into the Arabian slave trade. Let's see, where's that picture that I had up? The slave trade picture from our textbook. She went from that area in Africa to Arabia, and then to Turkey, and then to France. And so there's her story here we can analyze from a geographic point of view. We can look at how she moved from her region of origin to the place where she ended up. And it's extremely sad what some of the terrible torment she went through during her captivity until she was freed. But anyway, so I just wanted to mention some of the lesser known personalities of Black history that we can mention in February and relevant at all other times of the year too. So if you are studying this migration topic with me, other than Black History Month, these are relevant topics that help enrich our knowledge base and our understanding of how we can apply geography to personal stories of history, lesser known people in history who had significant enough impact, in this case, in the Catholic world, to be canonized as a saint by Pope John Paul II. So let's look again at migration, and I promise you we'll get to those development and the infrastructure topics that I mentioned in a previous lecture. We will do that next. See you then.